Hi, I'm Herm Gailey here on a hot day, sitting under my favorite tree with a glass of green tea that my daughter brought for me. She's behind the camera right now. And I may need some fortification because I'm going to talk about something that may be a little controversial, and that is the controversy, let's call it, between natural horsemanship and traditional horse training, which I'm going to come right out front and say I think it is unfortunate that that rift has developed or exists, because one can certainly complement the other. So natural horsemanship as we know it today is largely credited, in the modern era at least, to Ray Hunt and the Dorrance brothers. And certainly they did a lot to bring sort of a more horse-oriented approach to schooling and training and interacting with horses than maybe was traditional, especially in the days when those guys were most active, 70s, 80s, 90s. In fact, the natural horsemanship movement has to a degree overtaken traditional horse training. And the tendency is, and I'm doing something I don't usually do, I've got some notes here. The fact is that the natural horsemanship, as it's come to be called, does focus more on relationships, the relationship between the horse and the handler, the horse's feelings, which is fine, and the psychology of working with horses, and the idea of setting things up so the horse can succeed. All good things. Traditional trainers tend to emphasize technique more. They are extraordinarily goal-oriented because they're competitors. They often work on techniques and focus on specific movements or maneuvers for very specific disciplines. And the fact is, whether you're a natural horsemanship proponent that doesn't like horse trainers that train the traditional manner, the fact is they achieve a high level of proficiency and accomplishment with their horses. That is a fact. The trade-off, according to the natural horsemanship philosophy, is that their approach, the natural approach as it's called, takes into account being more kind to the horse, creating less stress for the horse. And they believe that the goal-oriented, technique-oriented approach taken by traditional horse trainers is often harsh and borderline abusive. And in fact, there may be some truth to that. The flip side is, though, that the trainers, the traditional trainers, think that the natural horsemanship people are really just ignoring the need for discipline, and ultimately, when you go down that road, you wind up with a half-trained, overindulged horse. And I don't like saying it, but there's some truth there too. The fact is, there's much to be said for both. And I think if the two sides came together and sort of hybridized things, you would come out with something that really took horsemanship as a whole to a higher level. And I just think it's a shame that this divide remains. And it also leaves me wondering what happens to a poor old bastard like me who's shown horses every year since 1965 except for 2020 during the pandemic, but who absolutely acknowledges that the principles of natural horsemanship are useful and applicable and helpful to most horses. Bottom line, can't we balance this a little bit? And I'm going to relate 2 or 3 stories here to illustrate that point, because among the best of the practitioners, the difference isn't that great. So start with Ray Hunt, absolutely considered to be one of the progenitors and one of the major communicators of the whole natural horsemanship philosophy. So in 1997, I had the opportunity to start a nice young horse at a clinic that Ray Hunt put on up at Willowbrook Farm. And each morning in the colt starting division, Ray would turn all of these horses out saddled, and he had a nice little mare, 4/6 bred mare that he was using to move these colts around, get the kinks out of them, just get them loosened up, get any buck out of them that might be in. He'd just chase them around as a group around the big arena up there on this little mare. Well, I think it was the third day of the clinic. This mare got a little bit rammy. She wanted to charge after those horses because she'd been doing it and she was into it and she was an enthusiast. And when she tried to sort of pull away and take Ray when he was moving these things around with his flag, he pulled her in the ground, backed her up, spun her one time each way, backed her again, dropped the reins, and she minded her business. But from the back of the arena, a lady who had been there the day before with a big, kind of ill-mannered, warm-blood looking horse. I don't know that it was a warm blood or not, but big, opinionated horse, clearly overindulged, says, "I can't believe what you just did. I came up here to see this kinder, gentler way, and you're punishing that mare. You jerked her into the ground." No, he didn't really jerk her, but he pulled her into the ground, backed her off. "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?" And Ray looks at her, and he was kind of a truth teller. And he was also not afraid to say what he thought. And he said, "Well, why do I do that? Because I don't want her to get like your horse." So there's the balance. Ray was as kind as he could possibly be to a horse. But rather than let things get out of hand, he fixed problems, and he fixed them with whatever means was useful. That's horsemanship. Not natural horsemanship, not traditional horsemanship, straight up horsemanship. Now, the other thing that I find almost amusing is the idea that this natural horsemanship concept is something new. To prove that it isn't, look back about 2,500 years to the Greek statesman and soldier Xenophon, who was an outstanding horseman and wrote a couple of the early treatises on horsemanship. And among the things that he said, and this is a paraphrase, is that nothing forced can be truly beautiful. And I believe that based on his writings and his reputation and his persisted through the centuries, he lived by that, and his horses were, as people like to say, willing partners. But then you look at what he did with his willing partner. I mean, and he did things like, he had specially constructed sandboxes. Even when he was engaged in warfare, they would make a place that he could turn his horse out, just a little area after they'd ridden all day, and it could roll and relax. That's how thoughtful he was to the horse. But what did he ask in return? In one military campaign, he rode a single horse 3,000 miles, and most of the way they were fighting. To prove that his horses were broke, you need only to consider the fact that both he and the horse survived the campaign. Those fellas, the Ray Hunts, the oldest cowboy from Greek days, knew how to treat a horse right, and they knew what to expect from a horse, and the horses delivered. And that I respect profoundly. Unfortunately, there's a tendency among the natural horsemanship folks to kind of treat their horses as grandchildren, and they end up as juvenile delinquents. Flip side, some of the horse show oriented trainers are so locked in and they care so much about horse shows that maybe they could care more about their horse's welfare. So balance it and recognize that we got two things going on here, and they should come together. The natural horsemanship side is outstanding on mindset. What is the horse's mindset? What is your mindset as the trainer? And the traditional people are really good on the skill set. What skills, physical and technical, do you need to have and does your horse need to have to succeed and to achieve at the highest level? If you mix the two, you stand a chance of having a horse that can perform at a high level, but with a lower level of stress, and thereby increase his proficiency as a competitor. So what we're going to do, and we may do this as a part 2, I've got a mare in the barn, and I want to sort of demonstrate on that single horse my thoughts as to how you can combine the two using one maneuver as an example. So if we'll probably put this up as a part 2, be sure and watch it, because it's my attempt to illustrate what we've just been talking about. Because what we need is not natural horsemanship. It's not technical horsemanship. It's straight up horsemanship. It's balance between the two. It gives the horse what it deserves, but it expects from the horse what you should be allowed to expect. So there are some thoughts. I'm sure it will provoke some comments and thoughts in return. They are welcome. See you next time.